for being here and for your kind words. And that is exactly what we want to do, right? Is reduce the trauma that people are experiencing, help them to form meaning and move forward. And what I'm going to do is actually just share a few words about the clients that we serve, the demographics, their location, the types of trauma that we're seeing. So we've broken it down to really look at, who are the clients that we are working with. Um, so I'm just going to pull this up to share this with you, and I will go through it quite briefly because we have a lot of wonderful stuff to cover today. But I do just want to highlight that we are quite new, and in the time that we've been open, we are constantly growing. Referrals are constantly growing. But just in the past year, even pre-COVID, and these numbers are not reflected here, but at the beginning of COVID, referrals just started to really come in. And at that point in time, they were just growing quite rapidly, and it's just continued to grow from there. So from May of 2020 to April 2021, we have provided trauma specialized therapy to over 248 clients. I believe this is an underrepresentation. Our students have been diligently working through our systems to try and pull the stats off of our database. And as I was going through it today, those are the profiles that we've been able to go through and fully edit and break down the demographic information for. But even that is really wonderful. So 248 clients in the past year, including 106 new clients, mostly adults, but certainly some children and youth from across Niagara, but also across Canada. Because I do work, in different areas, it does draw people to our center that don't have the means elsewhere. We've provided over 2,778 trauma specialized sessions. And just to give a quick insight to the demographics, the majority of the clients that we serve and support are either unemployed, on ODSP, on Ontario Works, or in the 0 to 14,000 range. They're living well below the poverty line. Most of the clients that we support are. I believe it works out to almost 80% of the clients that we support pay $30 or less per session. That doesn't even cover our costs, but it is an in-kind service that we've done, and that's why grants that we receive really are so significant and go quite a long way. When we look further at demographics, this was what I was just referring to, sorry, we have about half of our population again that pays under $30 or sorry, under $20 per session, and the large majority pay less than $30 per session. We do get occasional people who are able to pay more. It's geared to income. And just for awareness around any funds that are raised to support therapy in Niagara, that is allocated specifically to Niagara residents. So when we have clients out of area like Vancouver or, Edmonton or Montreal or other places that are seeking that support, we still are able to meet that support through the student interns that we train, but it doesn't come out of the money that was raised. That money is for paying therapists to do that, that applied work. So when we look at the gender, you'll see we have primarily female clients, but there also is a good male representation. And more than one time when we did in-office sessions, you would see a male in the office and they would see another male come in and you would hear them say, "Oh, it's nice to know that I'm not the only male that comes into this office," right? Because there's something normalizing and validating about that. Our age is quite varied. And again, we're working on updating our system. So I don't think that we have the most accurate representation of children and youth here, but it's a snapshot to give a little bit of a sense of who we're working with. We have clients of all ages. We work with little babies. When there's been pre-verbal trauma, we'll work with caregivers to do attachment enhancing work, all the way up to, I think the most senior client we worked with was in her 90s. So all across the lifespan, but primarily it looks like the bulk of the clients we're working with are 20 to 30 years of age, which, that's wonderful. My goal, however, is early intervention. So when a trauma happens, the earlier we can treat that trauma, the faster and the better the prognosis. But we can also treat trauma at any age, and that's I think really important to keep in mind. When we look at the demographics locally, the majority of our clients are based in St. Catharines. We're located in St. Catharines, so I'm sure that attributes. But also we see a large population from Welland, Niagara Falls, followed by Pelham, Thorold, Port Colborne, Niagara-on-the-Lake, Fort Erie, Lincoln, and we do have others from surrounding areas, but the percentages are a little bit smaller, so they're not showing up on the graph here, but we do have a nice representation across the region, which is really wonderful. And we had that, I would say, even pre-COVID, pre-going online. When we look at demographics more broadly, now these numbers are much smaller. It's just based on the numbers that were put into this graph. They're like, 2, 3, 4 people, not 11%, but it just shows that we have people from all over Ontario and even Canada. We actually have people internationally as well accessing support with us. So that's really wonderful to be able to see that healing. And I'm really proud to say that to date, even though we're not government funded, we've never turned anybody away for lack of income. So we've always been able to provide support. However, our wait lists are getting longer and the referrals are becoming more prevalent. So why does all this matter? What does this mean? Marie and Walter both spoke to the importance of, treating trauma, treating attachment, getting at those underlying issues. But what this really means, if I can just highlight this in a couple of words, our brain is undergoing its most rapid period of growth and development between the last trimester in utero and year 4 approximately. Most of us know this. Most of us don't know, though, that 5/6 of that brain growth and development is attachment driven. So am I picked up? Am I rocked? Am I held? Is there somebody lovingly looking into my eyes? Now, if we go back to some of the mass traumas, colonization, residential schools, abuses that happen in people's homes, physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, neglect. These are all things that the research actually shows us, if we look at the graph, the greatest prevalence happens 0 to 3 years of age. So particularly when our brain is undergoing this rapid period of growth and development, where our nervous system is growing and developing, where we're most vulnerable. We also have a high mortality rate there. That is when the bulk of this trauma is happening. And it really influences the way that our brain, our nervous system, our body grows and develops, the way that we relate to others, right? When we look at kind of a larger scale study of children, it shows the largest rate of maltreatment is neglect, which is also attachment trauma, followed by physical abuse, sexual abuse, psychological maltreatment, and medical neglect. So why is this critical? The research shows us there's a dose response effect between our early life experiences and later life health outcomes. So mental health, physical health, when we look at cancer, heart disease, stroke, diabetes, right? All of these things intersect with our early life experiences. And in fact, the former chair of the Pediatric Society in America said, this is a pandemic, it's epidemic. Sorry, it's an epidemic, and we need to get at the front of this because this is something that we can control. These experiences that we have intersect with our critical, sensitive brain growth developmental periods. We have these traumas that happen, which are also referred to as adverse childhood experiences, and then our genetics, epigenetics, intergenerational transmission of trauma. All of this feeds in to impact the way that our brain grows at an electrical, cellular, chemical, and mass level, and results in these hardwired adaptations. And many of you have heard me talk about this before. So we know that ACEs account for half to 2/3 of serious substance use. Each adverse childhood experience somebody has increases the risk, right? 3 to 4 times for early initiation of substance use. A 500% increase in alcoholism in adulthood is directly related to adverse childhood experiences. Nearly 2/3 of injection drug use is attributed to abuse in childhood. And a male child with an ACE score of 6 has a 4,600% increase in the likelihood they'll become an IV drug user in later life. Now, this is not to stigmatize, but it is to try to explain. when we have these experiences, it feels uncomfortable to be in our body. It feels uncomfortable to and unsafe to be in our worlds, in our communities, in, present conscious awareness. When, we don't have those tools, those loving caregivers to help us navigate it, we gravitate to whatever we can find that's going to help us feel okay again. And that's one of the things that I love about our model is it treats the underlying issues so that the substance use, the suicide ideation, the self-harming behaviors, the high-risk sexual behaviors, the crime behaviors, right, are no longer needed to the same degree because we're effectively bringing that arousal down if there's too much energy, or we're effectively upregulating to, help people feel more embodied and regulated. So what did we find when we looked at our clients? And again, this is a sample primarily of new intakes from the 2020 and 2021 fiscal year, that should say. So last year to this year, from the beginning of May to the end of April this year. We found that our ACE scores are actually quite high. So when you look, the great majority, we actually have 7.2% of the population that we looked at have an ACE score of 10. That's the highest score you can get. Followed by, a score of 8, 7, 6, 5, right? These are high ACE scores. There certainly are some people who don't have traumas. But again, if we're looking at this through this lens of how do we cope, how do we function when this is our reality, right? When it doesn't feel okay to be in our own brain and our own body, it really lends some awareness to some of the things that we see as survival-driven adaptations or outcomes. Right? When we looked at the actual experiences and broke it down a little bit more, I was even a bit surprised to see, not surprised, but I hadn't looked at it. The rates of childhood emotional abuse, over 75%, close to 80% of the clients that we serve indicated that they experienced childhood emotional abuse. That has the greatest impact on our brain globally out of any type of abuse that we experience. And it is often not given the attention that it needs. There, again, we're close to 75% of people that felt unloved in childhood. Love helps our brain grow, helps our nervous system regulate. It is critical for survival and development. A large portion had parents with mental health conditions. A large portion indicated neglect, childhood physical abuse, exposure to domestic violence, like over 50% for some of these. Parental alcohol and drug abuse, childhood sexual abuse, close to 50%. This is, these are large numbers and reflective of the clients that we're serving. Parental separation and divorce and parent incarceration have an asterisk because it's not part of our intake. So we have an intake package and the above questions are asked, whereas those two we only catch if somebody adds it kind of in the notes or they've indicated it on an ACE questionnaire that they've filled out. When we look further, so those are childhood traumas, right? That's looking at what's happened in people's childhood, in their developmental, formative, vulnerable years. This is looking at some of the things that, that were commonly coming up for adult experiences or later life experiences. Again, emotional abuse, exceptionally high. Over 75%, 80% report having experiences of emotional abuse. Close to 80% report mental illness. Experiences of physical abuse, sexual assault, domestic violence, suicide ideation. Close to half of the clients that we serve report suicide ideation at treatment entry. And I agree, Walter, I think those words are so kind. I know that we change lives, but we also save lives because we have people coming in with suicide ideation and stabilizing and regulating within 4 to 5 sessions typically. That is huge. Right. And it is not, as somebody who's worked with mental health and trauma for so long, it's not ever about wanting to die. It is about wanting my pain to end and really not knowing how to do it. Right. And the more constricted the thought process becomes, the more the pain becomes, the greater the lethality. Right. So if we can treat the trauma, if we can treat the pain and reduce the pain, we reduce the risk. Right. We reduce the incidence. Miscarriage is also quite high. Right, as well as a lower portion of criminal behavior. But so this just gives you a bit of a perspective about what our clients are reporting and experiencing. And when it comes to trauma work, and you'll hear from one of our clients this evening as well, the journey is not easy. It is not easy. Nobody wants to do trauma work. Nobody wants to have trauma experiences. We work with little children and they're like, I don't want to know. I don't want to talk about that because they'll tell you, where adults will often try. It is hard, but healing is possible. And the results truly are life-changing. So it's such an honor and privilege to do the work we do. And I hear this from our therapists all the time as well. With that, I'm going to do a stop share and turn things over. Sorry, my agenda has disappeared, but I believe it's Silvana is coming up next. Yes, so it's my honor to introduce, and I know some of you may have questions or comments. We'll leave some time towards the end for that. But that was a little Cliff Notes version of what I usually present in 3 to 5 days. So Silvana, I'm so excited to have you here. Again, I really appreciate your time and your willingness to speak on behalf of your experience. I'm so proud of the work that you've done and the journey that you've had. And I'll turn things over to you now to share a few words.